Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we'll tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hi everyone and welcome to the Behavioral View, where we are here in Season 2, Episode 2 with some amazing news. Because not only are you going to get to hang out with me, Shannon Hill, and Carrie Millico, but also this time Nissa Van Etten, who is joining the Behavioral View panel. Welcome, Nissa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Well, we are very excited too. So those of you who are regular viewers or listeners know that typically we have Rick Cabina with us. And Dr. Cabina has launched some new projects that you guys will be learning about in the coming weeks and months. So we have just done a little switcheroo and we've brought Nissa in to fill his seat. So
girl power.
There we go.
It's true.
So Nissa's title at CentralReach is the Manager of Assessment and Clinical Training. Do you want to say a word or two about what that means?
Yeah, at this time that is developing content and courses to make sure that educators and clinicians can use the assessment tools that we have at CentralReach effectively and efficiently with their students and clients.
That is right, which means I'm getting to learn a lot about the things that Nissa knows a lot about. So I really like that. I always enjoy. That's the best part of my role here, is getting to see all the wonderful stuff that you guys do on a daily basis. And I get to be a forever and ever student. So it's awesome.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. So those of you who are tuning in for CEUs, the process is the same as it always has been, where we're going to weave in some secret words throughout the broadcast. So go ahead and write those in, follow the links underneath, and we'll take you straight to the LMS where you will fill in those words. You have an opportunity to give us some suggestions of things you want us to talk about in the future or people you'd like for us to have on the show. But since this is Nissa's first episode with us, we decided that we were just going to not invite a guest. We're just going to really kind of do a deep dive and get to know each other by talking about hot topics. All the controversies in behavior analysis. Let's just say what we think. How's that? Is that how you typically get to know people, Nissa? Just dump out all of your thoughts on controversial things, right?
It's the best way to pair.
So I'll just go ahead and say now, corporate responsibility here. We always speak on behalf of ourselves. We never speak on behalf of CentralReach. Particularly in this episode, I speak for Shannon Hill, Carrie speaks for Carrie Millico, and Nissa speaks for Nissa Van Etten, right?
Yes.
Have any of you been declared spokesperson without my knowledge?
No.
Okay. So what we did was all of us kind of went into a document and dumped a lot of category questions in there, and I put them all into a PowerPoint. I Googled how to make PowerPoint shuffle slides randomly. I wrote a macro to make that happen.
Nice.
I need praise here.
I'm impressed.
You should be. It was a lot of work. Because I then had to Google how to make that work on a Mac, because it wasn't instructions for the Mac. Mm-hmm. Yep. Multi-step process here. And so we ended up with, I think, like 23, 24 categories. I doubt we get to all of them. And I didn't want to be the person who decided whose question was most important, because y'all know I would just ask mine. So random question generator has done its job, and the very first topic is BCBAs as parents.
I was just gonna say,
Ooh.
do we get a little do 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 do? No? Okay.
Put that in post.
This was my topic, and that was more saying, like, as a parent and as a BCBA, like, what are the push and pulls that you feel either, being a parent and knowing all that you do as a BCBA, and then also, like, has that changed being a parent, how you show up as a BCBA?
That's really when I read the topic, I didn't think about both sides of that, so I'm glad you put that out
Oh,
there.
thanks. Yeah.
So who's taking it first? I feel like I've
Oh,
talked
man.
too much already. Go ahead, someone else.
Well, let's let our new panelists go first.
This is a great topic. I love the topic. I think that it is something I've had to play with in my head in the last 12 years. So I have a 12-year-old, he's my oldest. And earlier in my career, it was more, I was, as a new BCBA, just trying to understand how to apply the science and how to do that with my clients successfully and always be there for them. And this was way back when we could still text our families and call them and be available a lot of the time. So I had a really hard time managing my own parenting and separating that from how I supported the families I worked with. I have one key memory in my head when he was really young. So he was 18 months and I'd been at work all day. I did a lot of direct sessions back then, as well as programming. And so after 8 hours of working in the field, I came home and he was crying and tantruming. And I remember looking at my husband and saying, I can't deal with this today. I'm so tired. I've been dealing with other children crying. I need to go take a bath. And we were young and new parents. My husband said, I'm sorry, no, you need to go in there. He wants you. You need to hold him and hug him. And it was a struggle. So I think, that was way back early on, the struggle of who I was as a parent. Was I a behavior analyst as a parent? Was I a parent where if my child was crying, could I just pick him up and snuggle him? And then was I reinforcing crying? A lot of that was going through my head. And I think over the years, I have 3 kids and I've tried to apply our principles in practice with them. And at times they're successful with like visuals and routines and schedules. But ignoring problematic behavior has been hard, dependent on which child it is. And following through is hard, dependent on what's going on. So looking at the entire, what's happening in our life at that moment. I try to use our tools. I think that being a behavior analyst and a parent, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. It's just there are a lot of, for lack of a better words, tight, strings tied to our hearts that are attached to our kids that sometimes we know the principles. It's just hard to apply them in the moment. I love this topic.
Yeah, I have experienced very similar things that you've described. And I have, a current colleague now, Kristen Smith, who always talks about parents need to be parents and provide a really soft, safe place for their children to land. And this shows up when we talk about parent training and stuff like that, where the parent is also serving as like the role of the RBT or bridging that, of what happens in the clinic versus what happens at home. But also, another great model too was my friend and colleague Kelly Ferris, and watching how gentle and beautiful she would interact with her children and provide very clear expectations to her children, but also being a mother and doing all the fun activities. I mean, she did some felting things and I was just like, you made that thing, and just relishing, like, this is mommy time, and still a great behavior analyst and someone that I love and looked up to. But she didn't have and we had our first children at the same time, and she didn't, it wasn't like a therapist voice that she had when she would talk to her children or ask them to engage in instructions, and I really love that because gosh, what a tough kind of atmosphere would we provide our children if we are always the therapist at
Yeah.
home, and they're like, oh, that, like, and that's not the environment that I want to provide for them. And yet we are also knowledgeable and equipped with a lot of resources. So, you know, we have token economies at our house. We have these little like gems, and so when they do good things, they earn like 5 minutes of screen time, and we pull that out during times in which our family's kind of going off the rails, and all of a sudden, you know, people are not at their best, and that includes the parents, right? Where we're not capturing the opportunity, like the great successful opportunities that we need to capture, and maybe we're just attending to all the missteps, and so that just brings us all in alignment, and it's not something that we necessarily have ongoing, but it's actually a resource we can pull out just to get the whole family in tune. And actually the kids when we don't use it, they're like, hey, can we use those blue gems? We really like the blue gems, even though I'm like, you're actually getting more tablet time now than you did when you had the blue gems. But you know, I agree that like when the kids were young, it was like, oh, they're crying. Do I have them cry it out here? Because I learned that crying's bad, but if I pick them up, is that reinforcing crying and da-da-da? And I think it goes back to some things that sometimes Shannon brings up, is like, we need to learn also about development, and also where, and then just who we want to be as parents, and is attending to some basic emotional needs as opposed to viewing our children as trying to be manipulative. So, I think it's definitely having a parent hat, and you still have your BCBA hat on, but you're not their therapist. You're their parent.
You know, I'm at the I'm at an interesting juncture with all of this. My son is 19 and he's an only child. So we grew up together is what I like to kind of like to think of. I grew up as a behavior analyst and as a parent at the same time. Everyone does, right? I feel like being a parent has made me more empathic as a behavior analyst for some of the things
100%.
that you guys have been talking about.
100%.
I was also a single parent from the time that he was 3. And I struggle with that term too. It's not that he doesn't have a father. There's nobody else in his life, but you know, we didn't live in the same town. So day in, day out, it was me. I always had, up until 2 months ago, at least 2 jobs. So his entire life, I have always had multiple jobs. So the load of guilt on me was huge his entire life. And I do know that there were times that I was not an ideal parent and that there were better ways I could have handled things. And I try to apply that when working with parents now. And I try to think about how many things is it reasonable and realistic to ask them to do. And I say that in that, you know, I'm also at the point now when I said it's an interesting juncture, I'm not really a practicing behavior analyst anymore. In the last few years of being behavior analyst, I wasn't working with parents at all, but I was working with teachers, and I can transfer all of that to the teachers because I know how hard it was for me to do these things with one kid. They've got so many in the classroom that we're asking them to focus on one. But I also think that being a behavior analyst did make me a better parent to my child. I focused in my career mostly on problematic behaviors. And my son is a very well-behaved child.
You want to come and hang out at my house for a little bit, Shannon?
I love other people's kids too.
I got a 6-year-old who thinks she's a CEO, so like I would love
my favorite, absolutely favorite. My favorite stories of him, and also because he's 19, Carrie and I have had this conversation before because we've kicked around some ideas for topics. Because he's 19, I have to be a little bit more careful than I feel like I used to be. I probably should have always been this careful, telling stories about him and things that we did. So he knows what my recurring stories are that I share. He likes some of them. He gives me tips on some of the things. But one thing that I think in behavior analysis as a therapist, we're always preaching about we're going to use punishment as a last resort, right? That you're going to do reinforcement, you're going to teach skills, blah, blah, blah. In reality, as a parent, when your kid is sitting in the back seat of the car and they throw a pencil and hit you in the back of the head with it, you're not going straight in your mind to anything other than a punitive response.
What versus stimulus can I present at this moment? But I think that the difference here, though, is that you're serving as a parent and not a therapist, right?
Well, but I also think that there's a difference in a punishment procedure and the just the fact that punishment and reinforcement are constantly occurring in the environment all the time. So in that example where he throws and hits a pencil hits me with a sharpened pencil in the back of the head while I drive, my very first instinct, because I have been trained so many years in crisis intervention and everything, I don't scream and yell. I don't turn around and hit people. That's been trained out of me since I was 19 years old working direct support. I simply rolled down the window and threw the pencil out.
Well, that's great that you caught it.
I did catch it.
A good shot if it hit you and then you were able to get it and throw it out the window.
Those reflexes,
That's
they're
right.
on point.
Right. It was a punishment procedure. He lost something that he wanted. He did not get the reaction that he hoped for with that. In training about that, punishment is something that is best used when it is rare. So if you are always responding in a punitive manner, it's going to go nowhere. My son tells 3 stories about punishment. The time he didn't get the snow cone machine, the time I threw the pencil out the window, the time I put the Xbox on the top of the bookshelf. That's what he remembers. He can't tell you very many stories of all the positive lessons that he's learned. And to me, that means I did a pretty good job, because if all his stories were about negative, yelling, screaming, whatever, getting around it, losing privileges, that would mean that, what would that mean? I'm not making my point very well.
Just putting the Xbox up above where, good job, Mama. If that's what he remembers, you did well.
Right. But there were only a few times
you didn't take the baseball bat to the Xbox, and so with that, bravo.
we did not. Yeah,
and I kid, but yes,
that's it exactly. If it's going to stand out in your memory, that means it wasn't happening that much in your life, right? So,
right.
I think that we do have to be realistic in what we make parents feel guilty about what they're doing when they're doing the best that they can in every moment. Skinner said that, right? You're always doing the best you can in every moment. You teach new skills, but we try to do that without judging people for what they've done in the past if they weren't just being outright abusive,
Secret word number 1, change.
And then another thing that I heard you say that I think is really important is that, you said you're like, well, I wasn't always perfect. And I think that we just need to recognize that as parents, and we probably acknowledge it more often than not as behavior analysts, being like, oh, I could have done that better, is because we know so much more around some of the principles of behavior, right? But it's not so much that we are always going to be perfect or necessarily be better, is that we recognize it is going to change our future behavior, and then we can fix it, right? And I think one thing that is we're trying, my husband and I are really being vigilant about, is noticing when we are wrong, is that we show up and we let our children know that we're wrong, and we tell them how we were wrong and what we are going to do to fix it and make it better. Because that also shows up as one, I want them to trust us and not fear that what that was is going to happen again, and let them know actionable steps that we're taking in order to improve ourselves as parents, because every stage that we're going into is something new for us. And then also serve as a model for our kids, because they're going to encounter errors and mishaps because they're learning, right? And every new stage that they encounter is going to be new for them. And so it's just like we make a mistake and we learn. The thing is, like, not make that mistake over and over and over again, but grow from it.
The thing that I really worry about, because my son is an only child and because it's just been the two of us forever, he's never really seen me have to negotiate conflict. I really worry about that, to the point that now I used to talking to people on the phone or whatever, withdraw to another room. I don't anymore because I'm so worried that he thinks that everybody's life just goes smoothly. Everyone just handles their problems on their own, things like that. So I'm actually trying to let him know what's going on in my life and how I'm handling it now that he's an adult. And this is one of those things I think, did I do this wrong? What age should I have started doing this? I know I did it wrong, but I don't know how far back I should have gone.
I think we all do that as parents, is kind of reflect and wonder, could I have done this better or differently? And I take that back to, I think one of your questions, Carrie, was how does this apply to working with families? I think as I've grown as a parent with each of my children, it has helped me be more empathic and kind of patient. Every time I meet or speak to a new parent, in letting them know, I hear you. This, just parenting in general, is hard. I can't imagine parenting a child with special needs, but parenting in general is hard, and there are no right answers. It's what's best for you and your family that's effective. And I think, every parent reflects on decisions, words they've said, things they've done, and goes back and says, I even did that this morning. I probably should have said it this way.
Before I became a parent, I thought, well, if they really wanted to change this behavior, then they would do X, Y, Z. I mean, if you really wanted to, right? And I mean, like, I even heard, like, on TikTok, there's this guy who's like, well, if you really wanted to lose weight, then you would do this, right? But then I saw, or I see my own behaviors in my kids, and knowing, like, yes, I really want this behavior to change. And yet there's all of these competing contingencies that are at play where I'm not collecting data, or the data that I'm collecting, I might as well not collect data because the data are wrong. They lie, and or I get so caught up in being like, well, I should actually, collect this, and this data. I mean, as opposed to just one big lump. Like, I get a little too sciencey with my data collection that then I don't collect data. But anyways, I realized, I'm like, oh, I'm not doing all those things. And yes, I really do. And if this changed, that would be a meaningful change in our family. And yet I have all of these other competing contingencies that are also non-negotiables for our family. So it's like adding another thing on top of that. And yeah, like we have a great life where, I work from home. My husband has a flexible work schedule. My kids, I have one with a diagnosis, but like, we're not, everything's manageable. My kids are healthy, but it's just like, why? If I can't expect it of myself, can I imagine it for somebody else, who maybe their life is, looking a little bit harder than mine is. So
I think it's helped also to simplify interventions for me. Things that I
exactly.
thought you must do it this more elaborate way. I realized
My interventions were gorgeous. And then I was like,
On paper.
oh, no wonder no one's doing them.
yep.
No wonder, right?
Get it for sure.
Yeah.
All right, ready
All right,
to move?
next topic.
All right, the next topic is the recent increase in certified behavior analysts.
Ooh, this could be its own episode.
Yes.
I think all of these topics could.
Yeah, I was gonna say that last one we talked about for a while too.
Yeah.
So the data just came out. I
think about 2 weeks ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had a great Slack
Which is
about
kind of fading when we were recording this, but yeah. So the new data just came out, and over the course of 12 years, let's see if my memory is correct. BCBAs increased by demand over 6,000%.
That
Was
is
it six?
absolutely
No, it was
It
more
was
than that.
about 6,000%. I think it went from, in terms of US job postings, it was 789 in 2010 and 46,960
Yep.
just last year. It's just
And
the
then there was,
demand for jobs has increased, but the percentage of BCBAs is, I think you were right, it's around 5 to 6% increase in BCBAs in the last 10 years.
but the demand has increased, significantly, like to a percentage that you're like, that percentage doesn't exist for an increase.
Yeah, how did we grow?
and even more so with BCABAs,
Absolutely.
which I think our field is kind of like, what do we do with those?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay. Comments
So the
around.
recent increase, I think, it's such a great topic. I think, one, we know that the need is there. We know that there are a lot of families who are struggling and children who need support, and adults who need support. And we know that there are a lot of individuals looking to join our field. I think this is a topic I've looked into a lot lately with my research is, what does a training look like for those
Yep.
BCBAs? And, I've heard different podcasts. Dr. Carbone had one, I think, earlier in the year talking about the medical model and having this post-certification type of residency for newly certified behavior analysts, just to support further that even though you've accrued that master's and those hours, there are additional on-the-job demands that we aren't prepared for.
For sure.
That being thrust into the field is really difficult to acquire those skills while managing a caseload and parents and all of the challenges that BCBAs encounter these days.
Yeah, I love that idea of residency or something like that. I feel like I got that a bit while I got my doctorate, because we got I went to UNR and we were placed at multiple places for experience. We had our stipend placement and we had our practicum placement. So while we were getting our master's, we were placed at two locations each year, one for our stipend, one for our practicum. So we had 4 experiences total for our master's. And then and granted, it could you could re-up the next year if it was a good fit. And then we continued our stipend all throughout our doctorate. But I think also that, there's, devil's in the details, obviously, right? And it's, if we have someone who has a master's degree and is working, we also need to make sure that, because my understanding of the medical model is like my 17 years of watching Grey's Anatomy. So,
and you are a doctor.
Right? So, what I remember of their residency was they live, sleep, ate at the hospital. They got nothing. I want us to still preserve an appropriate work-life balance,
Absolutely.
Make sure that they're compensated at a professional wage, but maybe it's just still having a path of training and oversight. Maybe that's just what it means, without being like you're still having the student status. And maybe it's just like, after you pass that residency, then the world opens up a little bit more for you with regards to compensation, and then that in of itself is a whole nother conversation. But I would just want to make sure that if we continue a post-graduation residency type of setup, that people were still treated as a professional,
and not as a student.
Yeah. Because some programs, I think we're getting better at this. I think our field, but at UNR, when I was there, people weren't graduating with their masters until year number 5 or 6. But it was, but that was, it's thesis dependent, and you went through tons of extra courses, and a lot of it was based on just whenever the course was offered. Sometimes it wasn't offered I had 2 semesters in which the course I needed wasn't offered. That was years ago, things have definitely showed up in different ways. And also, your thesis, who knows how long, that's
It's
going
going
to
to take,
take.
absolutely.
Those are just some considerations, but I too have concerns around now people are not doing theses for their certification, which to be a professional, do you necessarily need a research experience? Probably not, but is there something that you could do in place of, there's a lot of stuff that you learn from your thesis. I don't know, those are some considerations, but my biggest concern is that the practicum is not linked up to the university setting. And I think that I had the most valuable experience when that was the case. I know a lot of universities who don't have that, or have like a practicum supervisor who are creating relationships with approved vendors of practicum placements, but there's something to be said of a university affiliation with the practicum, and that the professor has an oversight of that, and it's just all harmonious.
Yeah. I mean, I was part of my job in a former life was overseeing practicum experiences, and the psychology students, we had a relationship with their professors. The OT students, we had a relationship. Social work, we had,
Yeah.
it's not an unusual thing for it to be that way. And that way the university knows that you're getting a high quality experience. And the practicum site knows what you know or what you should know when you come in there, at least
Right.
to some extent. But can I just go ahead and lay out my probably very unpopular belief? Okay.
Please do.
I understand and wholeheartedly believe that we have to turn some folks out to meet capacity. I think that there should be a point in time, though, where we say we have enough. We're done with the VCS. I think it needs to go away.
Oh, interesting.
I do. I'm saying that as a person who's grandfathered into being a BCBA. I know that there are a lot of people who have gone through VCS programs who are super dedicated and have done a lot of self-study and have done a lot of work related skill development and are absolutely fabulous BCBAs. But I also feel like some of the things that we worry about the most are because the training experience is too short and there's no way to get in all of these other skills. So for me, BCS is pretty good for someone who's maybe got a master's degree in a related field and a lot of years of work under their belt, have developed those kinds of skills somewhere else, and just need straight behavior analysis coursework. But I don't know that that's necessarily who's going through those programs to get these kind of numbers that were in that report. So that would be my vote.
I think there are a couple pieces that I'm interested in. One is looking at not only the VCS series, but also what additional courses can be developed to meet the needs of what we really face in the field as practitioners. I think a couple things, compassionate care is something I'm super passionate about. I know that right now there are a lot of people studying it, talking about it, looking for CEUs on the topic. And those individuals, and Dr. LeBlanc and colleagues conducted their survey on that in 2020, that individuals who had received degrees in other fields had training on interpersonal skill development and rapport building, whereas the majority of respondents who had gone through the VCS said they didn't. Now, they could be accruing those experiences through mentors and supervisors and fieldwork, but that's another area where we have huge variability. So what I might have experienced or what I experience is very different than someone else. And I think making sure that there's some structured standard for supervision. And I know the Supervision 2.0 curriculum came out a little bit ago, and that did help structure it, but it's still very unstandard. It's, I've heard it be called the Wild Wild West, kind of whatever supervisor you can find, that's what you get.
Yeah.
But that also makes me think about these individuals who are selecting that additional support. Hey, I know I'm needing support in rapport building. I know, cultural diversity is a new topic in our ethics code. And we want a lot of BCBAs to go out and get those CEUs, but who is trained well enough in our field to develop those CEUs? There are a limited number, maybe a handful of really excellent professionals. But what about, again, we've got over 40,000 BCBAs to make sure are educated in cultural diversity, and a handful of practitioners who are specialized. So I think about that. And then my last comment is going back to your comment, Carrie, on the medical model and kind of removing that thesis component. I think I didn't really truly understand the need for really reading research well until I got into my doc program. And now I feel like I get it. One of the things that you need to know as a practitioner, if you're arguing the medical model, is the research. Yeah. Why are outcomes happening for kiddos with, 30 to 40 hours of intervention? What does that look like? How are we supporting them? And if I'm not proficient in talking about that research as an applied scientist, then I won't be able to work with parents for treatment adherence, talk to funding sources to make sure they give me the hours I need, talk to my colleagues to talk about why this child needs a whole entire team of collaborators across different fields. I think that removing the thesis is concerning, or at least if they don't have that really understanding the science and how to read it so that they can talk about it.
I was going to say, I don't know that you necessarily have to write a thesis.
That's where I was going to.
Yeah.
When my classes, authors, please don't kill me. When I was an undergrad, all my ABA related classes, assessments, intervention, regular ABA, I actually never owned the white book until I was a professor. We didn't operate out of a textbook. Mm-hmm. They were all articles. And I have to give props to Michelle Wallace, Larry Williams, Patrick Gezzi for the amount of effort that it takes for you to actually create a syllabus that you have 6 to 10 articles a week that people are reading. But that's what we did. We read articles every week. We killed forests. Let's be honest. This was before you were reading on an iPad. We were killing forests. But and then every week we would write. Everyone was responsible for an article, and we would write a review of that article. Mm-hmm. Summary, benefits, limitations, every single time. And that was the best practice that I ever received. And it allows me to always, it taught me how to read research, and also to read it with scrutiny, as opposed to be like, oh, that's what the author said, so that's exactly what they did. You're like, are you sure you measured what you think you measured? Right? So, so that's why I'm thinking but for programs that maybe do operate solely from textbooks, then then your research, your experience with reading any sort of research then does come from a thesis type of setting. Mm-hmm. So I think it depends on how you set up that setting. And both take a lot of work, either side you look at it, right? But it's just one way that we did.
Yeah, I think just taking that, just bringing it all backwards again for what you were just saying, tying into what I was saying earlier. I have a problem with a program that's built around one book. I just do, even though it is a great book. But
and it's the least required amount. And I think it's for programs that are saying, oh, that's all we got to do. We just got to do ABC. Cool. We got ABC. As opposed to looking at, so it's maybe can we weed that out as opposed to eliminating VCS, but let's look at the demand. If we say that is not what you want something that provides more, right? And just to plug in, Shan and I wrote an awesome paper that talks about all the more that you want, but and it's out there for free if you just contact CentralReach. We'll put the links down below. But it's saying that that's your minimum. That's your minimum viable proficiency level, right? In product, it would be the MVP, minimal viable product. But for us, is minimal viable certification requirements, right? So that would be the here. And you want to find something that provides you more than just being baseline. And so it's finding that. And it seems, we have sought out those experiences. Like I said, UNR, that's why it took so damn long, always provided those experiences. But I think that's, if you want to aim to be that type of behavior analyst, then that's what you seek out. And so it either then creates opportunities for people to find those programs that provide more than just the minimum, and then the minimum people are like, oh no, it's coming to me. So then therefore they change what they offer and they provide more.
Well, you can draw a parallel too in psychology to the PsyD and the PhD. And I know we're not talking about PhD programs here, but there's probably a way to tailor that inside of a master's degree as well, where you have a thesis option and a non-thesis option. Yeah. And
we even had that at UNR. We had a non-thesis option, but it meant that they had to do, what was it called? A clerkship. It was a 6-month intensive clerkship.
Interesting. Tell us more about that. Do you know what they were doing?
I think it was they had to secure a clerkship at a place. Not many people did that. There was some, and I had a friend who did 6 months at Morningside. And I think that they
did they match?
Brush off the dust here.
Did school match them, or did they have to go find?
No, I think that I think this. I mean, your professor probably helped usher, some things. Yeah. It's we were a mentorship model. You were in a lab, and you had you had your advisor. And I think that if you probably didn't have one in mind, your professor was like, oh, well, what about this and this and this? And I have connections over here. I mean, you were never off on your own, thrown to the wolves. But at UNR, things were very much driven by student interest paired with your professor's expertise. So I had my friend Cynthia did a clerkship at Morningside, where she, through her, I actually think she's the one who created the initial contact, even though Pat knows Kent, but Cynthia also was doing research and presentations and precision teaching and created her own relationships. So, and they may or may not have had to do a paper or presentation at the conclusion of that. I'm not positive on how that kind of wrapped up as a nice bow.
I think a case study makes sense for behavior analysis training to have to do that. But no, I'm curious because I think I took myself off of the I agree to be contacted for supervision list because there's so many just people who are just randomly calling out for supervision, and that worries me. The programs, I think that you have a responsibility, if you're going to certify someone's training and that they're ready to go, to at least know what they're doing in those sites and not just say go find somewhere to work and get your hours in. That's a little concerning to me. I was going to say icky, but I'm trying to be more concerning.
Secret word number 2, growth.
Okay. Our next one is the industrialization of ABA.
Was this mine? This sounds like mine.
I think so.
Yeah. So this is more about how the field has shifted to an industry. And also paired with how that kind of the ramifications of that. I mean, there's I think probably a need, but also there's been some like hard things that has coupled with that, such as like RBT burnout, or just clinician burnout, to be just honest.
You've asked well, you haven't asked the question at all. Um,
Well, I mean, just, yeah, you're right. I didn't ask. I threw in it. You said hot topics, not hot questions.
that is right. Everyone should just respond to what they see. Yeah.
So, what I would say, like, what have been like some of the pros and cons of us shifting to more of an industry? And what are some things I think that we need to be mindful of as we are now kind of more in that area, at least as it pertains to ABA with respect to providing services to autistic individuals?
There's that. You know my feelings on that.
Yeah, but my question is, like, in other areas, would you consider that so much of an industry? I wouldn't say that. I say those are more like, I say that there's a freight train over here,
Yeah.
right? Like, it is, it's going one direction, and it's not turning around so much, right? At least with respect to like insurance and licensure and stuff like that, right? ABA, as even in education settings, I mean, that's maybe more in the middle, but like as it applies to even jobs, OBM and sport and fitness, like all those other areas, I don't think we can call ABA as an industry yet. We're like, please,
Call
sir.
me.
Yeah, exactly. I have something to say. So I don't think that we can even classify that in that area. I think more over here, with respect to, we have certifications, we have licensure wrapped up into there, we have payment methods, we have and that our clinicians are experiencing burnout in the same way that you see nurses and doctors and right experience burnout. That it is an industry with, there's products being created with that are matched to the service delivery. It's
a hot topic and it's a hard topic. I think that there's a component where, I mean, we can talk about our experience 10 to 15 years ago and how vastly different it is today. My experience when I jumped into working with autistics 10 to 15 years ago, I was hired by the family. I was there under a supervisor working with a child, but the parent was paying me as the tutor coming into the home. And now we've got a lot of RBTs out there who are, working in organizations, wanting to help, wanting to learn how to apply these treatments to kiddos or to adults in whatever department they're working in. But there's a consideration of burnout, that, there's compassion fatigue. There's not being prepared to go into the home. There's not being provided the appropriate amount of supervision. While that BCBA might have said, I'm going to provide this many, 20%, I think some cases it might be 10% of supervision, there are barriers to them getting out there to support them. And so you've got RBTs who are managing challenging cases without training and support, which leads to burnout. And then you've got, as we saw, the job demand that is so high that there are postings over 45,000 for clinicians to work with these autistics. And it's just, as you're saying, an industry that we need to look at some standards, some standardization that needs to come in and say, hey, this is what we know the 40 hours is what an RBT needs to be able to go and sit for that exam, but what additional components of training should they be required, or what ongoing training after that 40 hours is necessary to make sure that every time they go into work with someone, they're prepared and supported.
Right. And with the demand being so high, I get scared with our bare minimum being our bare minimum, because there will be not institutions, like organizations that will just pump out, right?
Yep.
That will just pump out because the demand is so high, the quality doesn't need to be there. And then that then results in harm, right? And like I just read about a case of a man who jumped from, I think, Arizona to Colorado, worked in 8 different agencies, with every single one of them resulting in physical harm to clients, and that finally, like, he's finally being stopped, but like eight times,
Yeah.
that it went through that many times, right? And both of those states have licensure, so it's
But you
like,
know what? That's not a behavior analysis thing.
no,
That's
no, but
No.
services
it's not just us,
earlier.
but I'm just saying, like, when the demand is so high, the likelihood for that stuff happening is
It's going to
great,
happen more.
right?
Yeah.
Sure.
So it's more like, if I have a selection of, let's say, if I don't need a babysitter, and I'm like, well, I'm just looking around, then I can take my time and look for a really good one. If I'm like, no, I just need someone breathing because we need to meet this demand, like, you may not be going through the checks that you need to do. And like, and then with some agencies going like, all we're looking at is just the bottom line,
Yeah.
then they're just looking for bodies in the chair, as opposed to,
Yeah.
some of the reasons why we get into the field.
So, I mean, part of for me, and I guess I said this was all about getting to know Nissa. Maybe it's getting to know Shannon too. One of my more stringent opinions as a very old lady behavior analyst, I don't think we treat diagnoses. That's just not what I was taught that we
Right. We were
do.
never taught that. Exactly.
And so what I do as an old-fashioned person is just kind of look and see the industrialization of autism services and think about we need to extend capacity in these other realms, in
Mhm.
this, in education, in adult residential services, in ADHD services, in all
Right.
these different ways, whichever you want to think about it by dimensions of the person or the age or the service system, whatever. um I think we have to watch what's happened with autism services and see what parts of this do we want to replicate as we extend behavior analysis, because I hope that we do. um and in order to do that, we have to be able to separate what went wrong because it was behavior analysis, what went wrong because it's just human services and those kinds of things go wrong. What pieces do we want to try to apply, and what do we want to steer clear of? And I don't really know necessarily that it's going to fall away that way as nicely as what I just described. Do we want insurance? Yeah. Do we want all the rules and crazy carve outs and exceptions and everything? There's no way to not have that, because even
Right.
if you're providing Medicaid services under Medicaid waiver programs, you still have that.
Mhm.
It's just it's not as there's not as many people involved
Sure.
talking about it, bringing attention to what the pros and cons are of this. But some of those reimbursement rates for adult residential
Oh,
services,
they're terrible.
yeah, in home-based
Mhm.
services, we in one hand are talking about people being um, overserved, too many hours, that sort of thing. And then on the other side, in schools and in these adult services, we're talking about 30 minutes
Minimal.
a week sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Are we even doing anything in 30 minutes a week? What can you even do? So there's some ways I really want to see it ramp up and
Mhm.
follow that pattern. But all the minimum trainings and pumping people into a system with that inadequate support,
Yep.
we don't want to do that if we can avoid it.
Mhm.
I wonder if you can, though. Is there a model that we can replicate from another system where they actually grew without stretching resources?
Pain.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I needed to learn other models to answer that question, but just casually seeing it, I mean, right now, the best model, when they're looking at like different layers in which we have our certifications, I mean, I see a medical model, with like doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners and stuff like that. But I mean, they're abused. They're eaten up and spit out, you know. Like that's
Yeah, rural hospitals get closed because they don't make enough money. And
yeah, that's really hard. So I don't really like that.
right. All right. Do you guys want to take one more before we call it a day?
Sure, let's do it one more.
Yeah.
I don't think we've done
Diversity
any
and
of yours, Shannon. Have we done yours?
okay, maybe we will.
We've done 2 of mine.
That's what the randomization
I
does.
know.
It's fine, but this is kind of fun, so maybe we'll do it again. Maybe this will be a recurring thing that we do.
Yeah, this is great. We're getting to hit some really good topics.
Yep. So the last one we're going to tackle today is diversity in ABA. Just a little
All right.
small topic. I'm sure you guys can find that up really quick.
Yeah.
I'll kick it off. It's inadequate. Go ahead.
Yeah,
How
I
are
think
we
we have numbers to demonstrate that as well.
we do.
Do we? Yes. Are we actually going to collect data on that now?
We have.
Good.
Right? I mean, well, we have diversity numbers with respect to behavior analysts.
Yeah.
And Nissa, you mentioned some really, I think a really good point is that while there seems to be a growing need for people to learn about this now, which is great that people's focus is now shifted, doesn't necessarily mean that anyone can teach about this. And that I think you said that there was like 5 people that, and it's probably right. I bet you there's like 5 people who can probably teach about this. And that it's something that should be done thoughtfully and with integrity.
I want to add a little something to that though, or tweak it just a little bit. There's about 5 people who are, not a can. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Because some of the best teachers that I had about diversity are just people in my life, right? Who are just good models and good sources of information. So all of our training doesn't necessarily, we don't have to follow the model like we did with ethics, where all of that weight was on John Bailey's shoulders for so long before other people started
taking it on.
Yeah, I can help you out with this, sir. But we have to have some connections to people who don't look just exactly like us in order to do that. So
for sure. Well, there's the diversity that you learn through your own experience, right?
Absolutely.
So from your personal experience, and then there's diversity that you learn through, I mean, there's a whole course of study, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is talking about diversity and inclusion and the research behind that, where I would say that there's probably, where maybe this is where I thought maybe you were coming from, is that there's very few behavior analysts who are studying diversity and can talk about it scientifically with respect to the research behind it. I think there's a lot of behavior analysts who can talk about their personal experiences with respect to diversity, and there's a lot of good podcasts too that do that, which I think we all should lend an ear to. That Robin Williams just actually turned me onto hers. Hold on, I used to have, it's reminds me of a song, and now I got that song out of my head, and now I forget the name of her podcast, but I'm gonna find it and I'll tell you what it is. But like, just, you know, listening to different people's experiences to help you grow, you know, is good for this, you know, very privileged white woman. But I think it's also good to listen and read the research, and that's just a different course.
I don't disagree. I do think though that there's still, it's very hard to apply those lessons thoughtfully and in an empathic way if you really very rarely have contact with people who aren't a lot like you. And I do think that we still live in camps. We still, many people, and sometimes I'm surprised because honestly, I live in Zoom land. So
as we all do.
yeah, and I went to a local business last week, and I heard someone who is of my generation make a very homophobic statement. And it shocked me to no end because I just never hear that anymore. Even, supposedly I live in in a place where you would expect to hear such things. But I would say that it's even rare just walking around in public now to hear racist and homophobic statements, even in the deep South, just said outright, for anyone and everyone to hear. But I looked around the room when it was said, and everyone in there looked exactly like me. And I
Did
think there
anyone
was,
say anything? Did
yeah,
anyone correct? Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I wouldn't say corrective. I would say send a signal that's not safe to talk about here. So anyway, the point being that even when you know it, you have to know human beings to see human beings and to treat them like human beings. If you isolate yourself only amongst people who are just like you, even if you know that stuff in your head, you're not going to put it into practice, which I think is the goal, right?
And I think, if we think about the literature, and I've done a nice deep dive into the cultural diversity literature in our field, and I love it. I think it's impactful in a way where if you just take it and reflect on it, one of the main topics that comes up, I know Fong and Tanaka talked about this, and one of the papers by Connors and colleagues is self-reflection and self-awareness. That is the first step to being able to understand who am I and what do I bring to my practice when I'm working with this family, X, Y, or Z, or this client, or even in supervision experiences. I know Dr. Sellers is working on supervision now, and she brings a lot of cultural diversity into her supervision experiences. And in that, that's just that component of what can I learn? How can I support clients that maybe look different than me? And it's not saying that every client that we serve needs to look like us, but we need to have that humble understanding of we don't know who they are and where they come from. And the best way to serve them is to learn that before we can provide really effective recommendations. And I'm thinking more of, parent training components. If we're going to build rapport with a family who is from a very different cultural background, I know in the past the ethics code was go and seek support from a more experienced clinician. Now it's look into your own awareness and your own reflections and your own biases and make sure that you can set those aside and be effective when you walk into their home. And I think that's kind of the first step. If we can't have these experts come and train all of us, which we know is just not going to be possible, understanding that looking to the literature and looking to other, fields like nursing and counseling where they've done a lot of this type of training and pulling their resource and saying, okay, well, how do I look at my own bias? How do I make sure that I leave that out the door before I walk in to support a supervisee or a family? I think that's the first step.
I just was going to say, but everyone can, because we've got 8 hours of coursework with available on cultural humility on the Institute and coming forth for RBTs as well. So
and those are good 8 hours. And yet they will say this is still just a super level type of, like, this is just the start.
Absolutely.
I do want to mention my 2 podcasts.
Yeah.
Shades of ABA.
Oh, I love that one.
It's so good. And they talk about diversity in multiple ways. It's a very, very good one. And then Black in the Days, which is the one Robin Williams has started. So those are my 2. That and Black in the Days doesn't necessarily, I mean, she, sometimes she brings in talking about, being a behavior analyst, but it's not about behavior analysis. So it brings in a whole bunch of different topics. So
it's something that Nissa said I wanted to bring back around because it made me have a thought. Is cultural humility a subset of just the need for humility in general in behavior analysis? There's no way that you're going to learn about every possible culture. You're certainly, if you work hard enough, going to come into contact with someone that has some I'm trying to think of the word, qualities or preferences, experiences that you can't possibly prepare yourself for. And maybe there's no one around who can. Maybe you're working with someone who's from a very small subset of people. But there's something to be said for how you're approaching the situation in general, of how you work with people and how you go in to assess a situation in a humility way.
Humble.
Humble.
Humble way. Thank you. It's getting to me late in the day. That I think it's hard to be culturally humble if you're not generally humble
Yeah.
in your approach to working with people.
It's so funny because one of the podcasts I listened to one of the episodes of Robbins that I listened to in Black in the Days, they were talking about humility and the definition of that and how you can still have, because they were like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with this definition, just about like being like devaluing yourself or not seeing yourself as important, whereas like you can still hold your value while appreciating someone else's and bringing theirs in. And I think that if you, because I don't want to say that like, no, my opinion may have been correct for maybe something else, but someone's saying maybe for their culture or their family, their community, that I can't take data collection this way, or I'm not going to, I said in a parent panel, and this one mother said because of their culture, she's like, I'm not going to teach my son how to do his laundry because he's going to get married to a Muslim woman who is also going to do his laundry. He will never have to do his laundry. That's our culture. That is how we work. And she's like, so you don't come at me with some of these ABA goals of teaching my son how to do his laundry or how to cook for him or something like this. She goes, because that's not how we are. I mean, that's their family. And I'm sure there's, other Muslims who have a different type of culture and family, but for them, that's how they operated. And so it's like, well, if I come at it from saying like, well, I could say, well, it's good for people to know how to cook for themselves. But this mom says, not in my family. I'm like, all right, not in your family. Right. So I think being able to defer to someone else and recognizing their own voice and respecting that and taking in what they say as value and as with meaning as a very loud data point, whether it's culture or not. I think you're right, Shannon, like the underlying tie here is humility.
And we cannot underestimate how hard that is, because I think sometimes, and this is what my point was about learning the research, which is, I'm not saying we don't need to. We definitely do. It's just not enough, because
No, you're right.
these get to be very, very tricky situations. So, in your example, what if it hadn't been a Muslim family?
Yeah.
What if it had just been
in the family?
a patriarchal family?
Yeah. And they were like,
at what point did we set aside what we're trying to affect culturally as a whole versus what's happening in the microcosm of a family? Where does that boundary exist? That's really hard sometimes.
Secret word number 3, pencil.
And I think I think a big thing that we need to do, and this is really hard for me at times too, is to know that like, if that family says, no, I will always cook for my son, or my son doesn't need to know that, that's something that you need to respect. You are there working for them.
Yep.
They are paying you. You are their employee. I mean, maybe not according to the IRS, but right? And so you're there to provide. You can say like, present things to them, but that decision is theirs.
That's right. Yeah, it is. And sometimes you have to know yourself well enough to say whether or not you can set this very firmly held value of yours aside and not be blinded by it in order to work on their goals, or if you need to step out of that situation.
Right.
It is very difficult.
Yeah.
Friends, this has been fun.
This is great.
Did you
We
enjoy
always
it?
skim the surface. I had so much fun.
Okay,
We
good. So
got through
you
4 questions. Can you imagine if we did this with wine?
would still be on that first one.
Yeah, we would.
Those of you who would like to see this with wine, go ahead and write that in on your quiz when you do your CE.
You're a Patreon member. No.
Behavioral view after dark. Okay, so yeah, so welcome to the behavioral view.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was fun.
We are very excited to have you. Had a great time, and we will be back next month with a regular episode. Stay tuned. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz, where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. If you've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.